Hi, I'm Larry Richardson and welcome to Zeniers.com Cooking. This week we're going to make vegetable-rich meatloaf. It's meatloaf with lots of onions and peppers mixed into it, which makes it a much healthier dinner. So come on, let's make some. Our basic meatloaf recipe will require 2 pounds of lean ground beef. That'll keep the fat down. It will require 2 pieces of toast, browned pretty well. I'm using a honey wheat toast for this. Some Italian seasoning, some black pepper, half of an onion, which will come out to about 3/4 of a cup, a sweet red pepper, which will also come out to we'll use about 3/4 of a cup of it. You can also use a green bell pepper if you prefer. 2 eggs, which we will put in the bowl and mix that all in, and 4 cloves of garlic. So now I'm going to start the prep work, and while I do that, I'm going to put the hamburger back into the refrigerator so it stays nice and chilled. The first thing we'll do is get out our food processor, and if you don't have one of these, you can certainly break up the bread into small chunks. That's perfectly legal. In fact, some people prefer the bread a little bit chunky in their meatloaf. You're also welcome to use more than 2 pieces of toast if you wish. Some people like a little bit of a bready or fluffier taste to their meatloaf. Others will skip the toast altogether. Those are the people who like their meatloaf on the meaty side. Personally, I like the toast. I think it provides some nice filler to the meatloaf, and it makes it taste other than just a chunk of hamburger grilled. So I'm just going to break this up into the food processor. There we go. Let's tuck that down so I can get the cover on. Move that plate aside. And here we go. This will only take an instant. Oops. Didn't mean to knock over the canola oil. And there we go. There's our breadcrumbs. Oops, the blade fell out. Got it. Then we'll cut up the vegetables. First we'll start with the onion. Now I like to use sweet yellow onions for these, or Vidalia onions. I tend to find that they add a nice complement to these meat dishes. And we don't have to be too fancy about the chopping since it's going into meatloaf, but don't cut it too small so that the onions disappear into the meatloaf, never to be found. You want to give it probably, I would say, about 1/8 to 1/4 inch square chunk. So we'll score this. That's one tough onion. And then we'll come back the other way. That's a sign of freshness. There we go, and I'm going to move the eggs away so there's no chance of cross-contamination. And just cut that down. Okay, so that's about 3/4 of a cup of onion. And let's put that into the bowl. Again, if you want to add more, do it. That makes it even healthier. This is a great way to hide vegetables and get them into the people who don't necessarily like vegetables. You don't even have to mention they're there, and just see what the people who are eating the meatloaf with you have to say. I find that most of the time they don't even notice it. So now I'm going to set that aside and add the rest of this onion. And next up comes the sweet red pepper. And we'll core that. This has already been rinsed off. Cut it in half. And then just cut it into, again, about 1/8 to 1/4 inch thick strips. But you don't want this to vanish into the meatloaf either. You want to be able to sense that it's there, taste it a little bit. You'll find that it gives the meatloaf a really fresh taste. Again, we're shooting for about 3/4 of a cup of pepper. And that is about one of these, I would say this is a medium-sized pepper. And there we go. Now while we're doing this, the oven is preheating at 375. It's really important to preheat the oven because if you put a dish in to cook when the oven is cold and it starts to warm up during that period, you'll never really know how long it takes your food to actually cook because the preheating process will, it can take up to 10 to 15 minutes. So you certainly want to make sure that that oven is good and hot before you add your dish into it. Now I have a garlic crusher that I like to use, but you can also mince your garlic into this. It's totally up to you. I just find that these garlic crushers are very convenient. Takes the paper right out nice and quickly. I don't know where that garlic just went. I have a sneaking suspicion I'm going to be cleaning up the floor. As long as it didn't land on the cat, that's good. If it landed on the cat, I'm really in trouble. Okay, so I'm adding that right into the dish. Garlic is something that you can add less of if you really don't like it, or none at all. Or if you're really hardcore, you can add more than the 4 cloves. But you'll probably have to make this dish a couple of times to get the taste down just the way you like it. So I'm giving you sort of the medium road in terms of garlic and the vegetables. So there we go. The garlic is in there. I just saw a piece of pepper with some paper on it. There we go. Next thing I'm going to do is crack the egg into this mix. Now the eggs tend to add fluffiness to the meatloaf. That's really why I add them. And you can add just one if you want, but 2 eggs spread over several servings really is not that much fat or cholesterol. So I'm just going to rinse my hands off really quickly. There we go, some nice soapy water. And it's time to add the spices. And I would start with a 1/4 teaspoon of the Italian spices. Mainly because this type of spice tends to take over dishes if you add too much. So there's a nice 1/4 teaspoon added into that. And again, later on, if you decide that you like it a little bit more with that Italian flavor, you can add more. Or you can skip it altogether. The same with the black pepper. I'm just going to have to crush this into the dish. But again, will probably come out to about a 1/4 teaspoon if we were able to scoop it out of this container. So there we go, and I'm going to throw that pepper cap away, move my knife aside, get this out of the way because we're about to bring out the hamburger. Now, before I work with the hamburger, I'm going to give this meatloaf pan a quick spray of canola. That will help to keep it from sticking to the sides. If you don't have canola, you can take whatever margarine or butter that you have in the house. Just take a little hunk of it and rub it along the sides to slicken it up. That way, if the meatloaf browns quickly, it won't stick right to the pan itself. It won't be hard to get out of there. And then let's add the meat. Now I like to wear these rubber gloves when I'm working with meat. It well, it tends to keep it from up under my fingernails, and it's just a lot more pleasant way to deal with mixing up a meatloaf. So as you can see, I'm just turning the whole dish in on itself and making sure that it's uniform. And this is a process that will take a couple of minutes. And as you saw when I was making this, I did add the Italian seasoning. Now, if I had skipped the Italian seasoning, I could have made this a little bit more of a Mexican dish and thrown in some jalapenos. And it would just have a little bit more of a Tex-Mex taste, and you know, you would serve it a little bit differently than the standard meatloaf. You might want to have your salsa and chips with it. Whereas this style with very little Italian seasoning tends to go better with more traditional American fare, you know, the meatloafs and with the mashed potatoes type dish, maybe some gravy and you know, some of your heavier vegetables like broccoli. So it's up to you how you want to flavor it, but there are options out there. You don't have to make it exactly like this. My main objective in showing you this recipe is that you can put vegetables into places that you would not expect to see them, into dishes you would not expect to see them in. And that's what I'm shooting for. Another thing you could do is cut these vegetables a little bit smaller if you don't really like that veggie zest in your dishes. So that's completely an option. I'd say that's pretty much mixed up. I'm starting to see the breadcrumbs are a lot smoother in the mix. Okay, so now I'm going to bring over the baking pan, the meatloaf pan, and just add the mix into it. And kind of push the vegetables down a little bit so they don't roast on the top too much. Put a little edge on the side of the pan. That way, if there's any grease, which there usually isn't in lean hamburger, it will be able to flow to the sides and it's easier to drain off. Any water from the vegetables, the same thing, although I've never seen one of these meatloafs get flooded. So the next step I'm going to make is put the meatloaf into the oven. The oven has preheated at 375, and we'll leave it in for 45 minutes to an hour. If it starts to burn on the top during that period, you can put some aluminum foil on the top just to keep it from over crisping. Otherwise, let it cook right through, and then I'll meet you at the other end. So here we have it, veggie-rich meatloaf fresh out of the oven. I did end up cooking it for about 50 minutes to make sure it was cooked all the way through. And as you can see, it has the peppers, the onions in it, all those delicious chunks of vegetable mixed in with the meat. Now, one thing we did not do during the cooking process is we did not add any salt to the mix. I find that when I add salt to different recipes before they cook, that the salt just vanishes. So a good idea with a meatloaf and most other dishes is add your salt per serving. Do it when you're ready to eat. That way you won't have any hidden salt in your meal. So please visit me on Xeniors.com. Let me know what you think about this recipe and pick up the recipe on the site too. It is there and you can print it. So I'll see you at Xeniors.com and I'll see you in our next cooking video.